Hi there. Today I'm going to be presenting on this chapter, J. Brown, Chapter 2, Adopting, Developing, and Adapting Language Tests. You can find this in modules on the Canvas page here. The title of this chapter is Adopting, Developing, and Adapting Language Tests. So the first challenge in test adopting, developing, and adapting is theoretical. You see these two pictures here. One of them is a real person. The other one is like a stock photo. The person to our left, Sandra Savignon, represents one theoretical approach to testing, and this person to our right is described by Brown. I don't know if it's great that he does this, but the granny glasses, the ruler in hand, strict grammar teaching teacher. This represents a other theoretical approach to teaching. And so, yeah, let's keep going. The three language movements. So yeah, we have this another caricature of a teacher here. Brown comes up with a caricature named Miss Fitch, who represents the very strict grammar teacher. Sandra Savignon is a real person who represents a move away from this type of testing in language teaching. So the three language movements we have are pre-scientific movement, represented by a clock, psychometerist, and the integrative sociolinguistic movement. The pre-scientific movement lacked concern for concepts such as objectivity, reliability, and validity. In my own chapter summary writing, I said that I identified with the pre-scientific movement, especially during my first years of teaching, because I really didn't have too much of a backing in educational theory. I didn't have any concern for statistical techniques such as reliability coefficients, validity studies, and descriptive statistics. The next is called the psychometerist structuralist movement. This is where educators and testers began to worry about objectivity, reliability, and validity. So there was suddenly like, oh, let's make this a science. Let's make this real. Let's make this have the backing and credibility that can come from working with the interaction between the linguists and the specialists coming together and forming some really solid things. Science, I think of it as science coming in, the pre-scientific, and this is now the scientific. This all began by measuring discrete point item tests. We know discrete point item tests. Think about what those would be. And these were all largely machine gradable. During this period, we saw the rise of the first carefully designed and standardized test. We had a presentation on the Michigan Language Assessment. This was a test that came out of this period. I also put this American flag because whole countries could say this test is stamped with our approval. We've put our scientists, our specialists, our linguists to create this. Next up, we got the integrative sociolinguistic movement. Integrative sociolinguistic view of language believes that language is more than the sum of discrete point tested parts, and that language is creative. Savignon would argue that this special creativity is what real world communication hinges on. We have this picture here. We have these people communication. That's a lot bigger. It's a lot different than testing discrete points. Yeah. So yeah, no more of just the sum of parts. We need students to be able to communicate. So Brown's speculation for the future of language testing I thought was really interesting. It seems that if he had to place his chips, he would put his bets towards language testing becoming even more performance-based, perhaps even orienting towards communicating a real message with real importance or oriented in completing a real task. An important element he wishes to tie into this speculation is the importance of all the unpredictable data that comes out with communication, the micro things you do to clarify or to backpedal. These are unpredictable and hard to measure. Brown writes that in order to grade the unpredictable aspects of language, it might necessitate a partial shift away from the objective and seemingly dispassionate form of grading that we have so much of today. You know what I really wanted was to put a robot with a heart, to think of the grading system that we've had, which is very like dispassionate, but very reliable, to moving forward into finding perhaps less reliable, but actually able to provide a grade to something that would be hard for a machine to grade. Maybe in the future, machines would be able to grade and measure some of the unpredictable things that come up with speech. Say if you're really doing a real task, like a real task can never be done the same way twice if it's a real enough task and a real enough test for like how language is used in outside of a classroom. If there were machines that were able to measure things similar to how you put a Scantron through a Scantron machine, that would be really cool to see. I think that's what Brown is hoping to see. I focus maybe too much on the passionate side of it, the idea of the human coming back, maybe coming back to something, reminding ourselves of the pre-scientific. Like, I'm sure those teachers were great. They just weren't using the, I think they were just doing something that to me seems kind of intrinsic to human relations teaching. Then the science came along here with the psychometrist structuralist movement. And then in Brown's writing, the integrative sociolinguistic movement comes in where it's about communication. Something important to add to this is that science wasn't left. Science is really tied closely to this. They kind of, it comes out of the psychometrist structuralist movement, the integrative sociolinguistic movement, to think maybe in the future to not having leaving science, but yeah, anyway, it's all there. Okay, sorry. Language test issues. These are the next issues he tackles: the channel issue, the mode issue, and the overlap. The channel issue describes test tasks that access either a student's written channels or their oral channels. A reading activity is deemed written because it's an activity that contains written word. A listening activity is deemed oral in that it contains spoken word and listening. So we have the written channel. I put the two examples that kind of maybe seem counterintuitive. The reading activity is a written channel because it has written words, and also the listening activity is an oral channel, even though the ear doesn't produce sound, we're still receiving orally produced sounds through our ears. Obviously, a writing activity is a writing channel, and obviously, a speaking activity is an oral channel. The next is mode issue. We have the productive mode versus a receptive mode. The outward manifestation by way of writing or speaking are defined as productive, and the skills involved with receiving and understanding are defined as receptive. So this is a thinker. I might pose it in our discussion. I haven't really decided what to put for a discussion question, but what mode is involved in answering a true-false question? Is it a productive mode or a receptive mode? Obviously, there's overlap between all of these, even overlap between the individual modes. So like there might be an activity with both productive and receptive. Next, Brown talks about Chomsky's views on competence and performing. Chomsky differentiates between competence and performing as follows. Competence is the speaker-hearer's knowledge of the language, and performance is the actual use of the language in concrete situations. So competence being the speaker-hearer knowledge of language inside brain, and performance being the actual use of language in concrete situations, especially as seen by the teacher. Brown would like this distinction to help teachers realize that tests are fairly artificial observations of a student's performance, and that performance is only an imperfect reflection of underlying competence. So here we have an image of a broken mirror. It does reflect the inner competence, but it doesn't do it perfectly, and it can't, and teachers should accept that. Practical issues of testing, the objective versus the subjective. Yes, so this is now practical issues. So we're now away from mode, channels, etc. We're looking at the practicalities of testing. Brown writes, the tendency to seek objectivity has led to the proliferation of objective tests, which is to say multiple choice. Yeah, so we're talking about with the psychometrist structuralist movement. It does lead to a lot of multiple choice objective tests. That we can put a stamp on. The science is there, it's solid. Brown writes that whether a teacher likes it or not, they will not be able to measure everything impartially and objectively. This is especially true of tests on the integrative end of the discrete point to integrative continuum. So yeah, if we have a continuum, there's like the discrete point test at one end and the integrative tests on the other end. Yeah, the more integrative a test is, the less objective it will be. So for example, an oral interview is going to be highly subjective. We're going to have, and then the multiple choice that we have here will be more objective. The cost issue of testing. Brown states that a lack of funds can cause the abandonment of otherwise well thought out theoretical and practical positions a teacher has taken. So basically, if you have to delegate your own or your school's time and money, your considerations for appropriate testing are going to change. Brown gets personal in this chapter when he writes of his own transformation from going from a teacher to an administrator, and how the standardized testing basically worked his way into his heart to be what he wanted his school and program to do. Even though as a teacher, he was strongly against it. The ease and the reliability of it in grading kind of basically, he was like, this is it. We're going to do this. This makes sense. It's good. But as a teacher, he was strongly against it. But when he was in the position to decide what the school should do with its resources, he was like, this is it. So we have cost and we also have time, which could also be seen as cost, but I think they're important. When adopting, adapting, and developing tests, that is a real thing. The logistics of testing, even though a longer test does a better job of assessing a student's performance, or even placement level, the short tests are easier to write than the long ones. This is a logistical issue. Another issue is that different types of tests are easier to construct than others. Yeah, so a dictation and a composition test are both really easy to create relatively, as are short answer questions and translations. Most of the information that is important, and you grade that. The question can be straightforward, but it doesn't take as long as, say, the fill in the blank questions, the matching questions, the true false questions, and multiple choice questions. Brown writes even that a well-balanced multiple choice question, a well-created one, is the hardest to create. Brown writes that from his experience, the ease of scoring is inversely related to the ease of constructing the test type. How hard is it to score a multiple choice test? Not very hard. How hard is it to make one? A lot harder. The same applies for how hard is it to create a translation question. Not too hard. How hard is it to grade a translation question? Probably a lot harder. So the last part of this chapter is finally talking about adopting, developing, adapting. And honestly, we don't go too much into it in this chapter. It seems like in the later chapters, he goes deeper into it. He says that in reading his whole book, you will know how to do this. But these are just things you should keep in mind with the thoughts of it. So first off, adopting. Puzzle piece here. That's an important image, I think, in adopting. Teachers can't go out and buy a commercial test and expect it to automatically work with all students for any program. You need to first assess the appropriateness of the test your program needs. In your unique puzzle with a missing piece in it, you have to find the right one. To do this, you can review some scholarly publications on test reviews that are out there, which are uncommon, it seems, but maybe now it's more common. Another way is to review the test yourself. To do so, we would look at its productive versus receptive. You'd also analyze what portion of the test is utilizing the written versus oral channels, like we've looked at, and also what is the theoretical framework that the test provides and is in, and also what's the theoretical framework of your program. And you don't want to have something that ruffles all the feathers, honestly. So in developing, Brown writes that ideally teachers would have enough resources and expertise available to write up all their own proficiency placement, achievement, and diagnostic tests. Ideally, he writes, since Brown writes ideally, I really feel that this is not often enough the case. The last point is adapting, and I had this kind of a background here because I couldn't figure out a place to put it on this page, and I wanted this image to be, because we have some people here, we got some scientists mixing and making some chemical reactions and testing. And that seems like an important image to think about with adapting. So here are the steps to follow to fit the needs and purposes of a particular language program. Step 1, to administer the tests in a particular language program. So you just, the test, a test, test. You administer it, particular language program. 2, select test questions that work well at spreading out the students or that are efficient in measuring the learning and of the objectives in the particular program. So they've taken the test, you look at the questions, you look at their answers, you see which ones worked well at spreading out the students and or that were efficient at measuring the learning of objectives in the particular program. Step 3, develop a shorter, more efficient revision of the test, one that fits the program's purpose and works well with students. Brown notes that on this third step, additional questions might also be necessary, but I like that, to develop a shorter, more efficient revision of the test. And then lastly, to evaluate the quality of the newly revised test. In a way, you can just go through that cycle again. That is his definition of adapting. Thank you for listening. I'm going to add that video of Sandra Savignon. It might not have any relevance, but I think it's kind of cool to see this person since I read this chapter and she was brought up a lot. I also add the discussion question to Canvas. All right, have a good one. Take care.